Hey guys, tonight we ease back into time, settling with you on a dark shoreline where the surf hisses gently and the sand cools beneath your toes. The stars above are astonishingly sharp, like someone over-polished the dome of the night. You feel your shoulders drop, your breath lengthen, and the hush of the ocean wraps around you. The first pinpricks of light seem ordinary until you realize you're staring at a map, drawn not on paper, but on the ceiling of the sky. Polynesian navigators lived and sailed by it. And if you had to actually get a canoe across thousands of miles of open water using nothing but those stars, let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive this little adventure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the sand and notice how the horizon swallows the last glow of sunset. The stars flicker into place one by one, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. The Polynesian navigators didn't just admire this view, they depended on it. They knew which stars rose, where which dipped into the ocean at dawn, and how their arcs traced silent highways across the sky. The Milky Way itself doubled as a grand glittering avenue pointing roughly southeast to northwest like a cosmic runway. You shuffle your feet, the surf lapping at your ankles, and imagine a canoe sliding out into this vastness. It's not a dinghy with a backup engine, it's a double-hulled craft lashed with cord carrying food, water, and the collective hope that you'll reach another speck of land. At this moment, you feel the sheer absurdity and the quiet genius of trusting the stars as your guide. A mainstream fact drifts in: the Polynesians settled one of the largest geographic regions on Earth, from Hawaii in the north to Aotearoa, New Zealand in the south, and to Rapa Nui Easter Island far east, all without compasses or written maps. It's staggering when you recall that even European sailors with compasses and charts often got themselves thoroughly lost. But then a quirky tidbit catches your attention. Some navigators practiced by lying flat on the sand, staring at the stars as the Earth turned. They'd memorize which stars aligned with which coconut trees or hills. Imagine your local park doubling as a celestial simulator. Your dog walkers and joggers might get suspicious if you were lying flat on the ground whispering "Sirius over lamppost number 3, but it worked. Historians still argue whether every voyage was intentional or whether some islands were stumbled upon accidentally. But as you picture the night sky being rehearsed like choreography, it seems harder to believe that all this was left to chance. The people who studied this map weren't rolling cosmic dice, they were reading a script written in light. The beach is quiet now, a few ghost crabs click along in the moonlight. You lean back and squint, trying to trace connections. There's the Southern Cross, small but vital, pointing down toward the south. There's bright Canopus gleaming like a searchlight. And over there Arcturus climbing upward with all the self-importance of a celebrity entering the stage. You realize each one is more than a point of light. They're reference markers, like exit signs on a highway, telling you where you are and where you're going. Still, it's daunting. You imagine yourself drifting in a canoe's seas, rolling beneath the horizon, a perfect circle of nothingness. One wrong turn and you're toast. It's here the gentle sarcasm sneaks back in. Sure, you could probably last an hour, maybe two, before you panic and wish you'd sprung for a GPS. But the Polynesian navigators weren't panicked. They were calm, focused, and most impressively sleep-deprived, but still accurate. The reality check hits. This wasn't magic. It was thousands of hours of memorization, practice, and trust. The stars became teachers, the ocean a classroom, and every voyage a final exam. You stretch your legs out on the sand, realizing how much comfort comes from knowing the ground won't move beneath you. Out on the canoe, the ground moves constantly, rolling you, tilting you, testing your balance and your memory. Still, the stars stay faithful. And tonight they're more than faithful, they're whispering to you. You may not survive sailing by them, but you can at least listen and drift and begin to understand how their quiet guidance kept canoes from disappearing into endless dark. You step off the sand and into the faint sway of a canoe tied loosely at the shoreline. The timbers creak with a tired sigh, and the smell of salt and woven pandanus mats rises like the scent of an old library. You glance around for the expected chart's parchment with lines, maybe a compass, rose only to realize nothing like that exists here. The Polynesian map isn't something you unfold, it's something you hold in your head. A star path isn't written in ink, it's sung. You hear the low hum of a navigator's chant syllables curling like smoke into the night. Each word names a star, and each star has its place on the horizon. You picture a mental string stretching from one bright point to the next, and the canoes sliding beneath those celestial threads. You can't get lost because, in a sense, the song won't let you. It loops, it repeats, it tethers you gently to the sky. Here's a mainstream fact: the star compass, or sidereal compass, was not an object but a memorized system. Navigators divided the horizon into houses or points where stars rose and set. Each house was like a cardinal notch, and by recalling which stars belonged there, you could orient yourself even when everything around looked identical. But here's the quirky twist: some navigators gave each star house a personality, almost like a neighbor in a village. The Southern Cross wasn't just 4 stars, it was a signpost family pointing a reliable way south. Arcturus, known in Hawaii as Hokulea, was a kind of royal guest announcing a route toward the islands of the north. When you humanize stars, it becomes harder to forget them. It's like turning your night sky into a gossip network. Oh, Hokulea is rising. Must be time to check north. Historians still argue whether these charts and mental maps were standardized across the whole Pacific or tailored within each island group. Some suggest that one navigator's songline might confuse another, like swapping subway maps between 2 different cities. Others believe the training schools of the old Polynesian priest navigators kept things surprisingly uniform. The debate lingers like the argument over whether pineapple truly belongs on pizza, heated, unresolved, and weirdly personal. The canoe rocks as you imagine yourself tasked with recalling 100 stars, their rising and setting points, and how they link into larger routes. Your own brain feels sluggish just remembering your Netflix password. Yet for a skilled wayfinder, this was daily bread. The act of memorization itself was woven into the rhythm of their lives. Nights weren't for sleep, they were for rehearsal. And days weren't idle either. Shadows, birds, and wave directions confirmed what the night had already whispered. A hush spreads as the chant continues, the words like footsteps across invisible stepping stones. You lean back against the lashings, close your eyes, and realize you can almost picture the horizon houses as a giant clock. Midnight doesn't just tick, it moves, star by star. You drift northward with the rising of Vega, westward with Altair, and southward with Canopus dipping low. If you attempted to sketch a star map on paper right now, it would look childishly messy, like a spider had lost its balance. But that's the thing, Polynesian maps weren't flat diagrams. They were living. They were the kind of maps that breathe, only when recited, only when sung. It's the difference between owning sheet music and actually hearing a lullaby. You chuckle softly at the modern absurdity. Imagine explaining to your phone's GPS, "Hey, just sing me the directions instead." Your device would short-circuit, but here the singing works. It not only guides you, but calms you, lulling your mind into rhythm with the waves. Navigation wasn't just science, it was art, ritual, memory, and yes, a little performance. The stars wheel above, patient as ever. They don't care if you stumble or forget. They'll rise again tomorrow, offering another chance to learn. And you, lulled by the chant and the rocking canoe, feel yourself stepping quietly into a map that cannot be lost because it's stitched into breath, voice, and memory. You shift your weight as the canoe nudges forward, and you notice how the vessel itself feels like more than just transportation. The woven lashings creak, the twin hulls slap softly against the water, and the triangular sail rustles with a low sigh. It dawns on you this canoe is not just carrying a navigator, it is part of the memory system. You aren't just floating on wood, you're floating inside a giant cue card. Every line, every knot, every component whispers a reminder. The rigging pulls in certain directions, hinting at prevailing winds. The placement of food baskets marks balance. teaching you to sense shifts without looking. You run your hand along the lashings and realize that when a student trained, those knots and lines weren't merely structural, they were mnemonic triggers. Forget your chant, touch the canoe, it will remind you. Here's a mainstream fact. Polynesian double-hulled canoes, like the ones reconstructed today, could stretch over 60 feet long and carry dozens of people. These weren't flimsy rafts, they were engineered machines able to cross thousands of miles. The very size meant they could support navigators, priests, apprentices, and provisions for weeks. But a quirky tidbit sneaks in. Some navigators believed the canoe itself had a spirit, a kind of personality that could get moody. If the canoe groaned unusually, it might be complaining about balance or heading. That belief wasn't just superstition, it was practical. It made sailors pay attention to every creak and sigh. Think of it like your car's engine light, but with way more sass. Historians still argue whether every design element was consciously mnemonic or whether modern scholars are romanticizing it. Was the canoe deliberately built to teach, or did it incidentally become a teaching tool? The debate lingers like an oar, half in, half out of the water. But as you press your palm to the timbers, you can't shake the sense that memory is embedded in the craft itself. You lean back against a crossbeam, letting your eyes travel from the sail to the horizon. The mast's angle helps you gauge wind direction. The way the hulls ride the swells reminds you of the dominant wave pattern. Without meaning to, you're learning. The canoe is tutoring you one creek at a time. And there's humor in the thought. Imagine a driving school, where the car not only carried you, but actively corrected your mistakes. The wheel turns itself, the brakes squeak when you drift, the seatbelt whispers multiplication, tables. It sounds ridiculous, but on this canoe that's reality. You don't just sail, you study. The night deepens, and with it comes a sleepy intimacy between navigator and vessel. You stroke the rail, murmuring under your breath as though the canoe is a co-pilot. The stars shimmer above, steady in their brilliance, but it's the canoe that keeps you steady below. You realize how reassuring it must have been. No one is truly alone when the craft itself becomes a companion. The water slaps lazily, the air grows cooler, and you sense the double-hulled form cutting through time as much as through sea. This isn't just a boat, it's a memory palace with sails, and every groove, every knot, every whisper of rope tightens the map you already carry in your head. You exhale slowly, knowing that while you may not survive, navigating with it at least for tonight, you can float with trust, rocked by a vessel that remembers more than you do. The canoe slides forward into a hush of night, and now your gaze steadies on the horizon itself. You realize it isn't an abstract circle. It's divided into sections like rooms in a house. Navigators called them star houses, and each rising or setting star had its own address. You squint, watching Sirius climb like a slow ember, and you whisper to yourself, East House. Then you catch Canopus, lowering its crown into the southern water, West House. Suddenly the ocean feels less infinite, more like a hallway lined with glowing doorways. Here's a mainstream fact. The sidereal compass divided the horizon into around 32 points, comparable to the points of a European compass rose, but marked by stars instead of degrees. Each star's rising and setting marked a direction, giving sailors a full ring of reference without any instruments. A quirky tidbit floats into the air. Some navigators grouped stars into family clans, where older stars led younger ones across the horizon. Arcturus might be imagined as a parent with a train of children rising after him. It wasn't astronomy so much as social gossip projected onto the night. You smile because who wouldn't find it easier to remember cosmic directions if they were told like a soap opera? Historians still argue whether this sidereal compass system was uniform across Polynesia or whether it shifted with local traditions. Was Hokulea Arcturus always the same directional anchor, or did his house change depending on the island? The answer remains blurred, like trying to pin down whether everyone's grandma makes the same recipe of soup. Probably not, but the family insists theirs is the authentic one. The swell rocks the canoe as you practice in your mind. Canopus to the south, Altair to the west, Vega to the north. The repetition is hypnotic. The horizon itself seems to thrum, each star house glowing faintly in your imagination like lanterns lined along a festival street. You picture a trainee navigator at night standing barefoot on deck, repeating the order of stars until they blur into rhythm. His teacher sits cross-legged, correcting him gently, like a music instructor guiding a student through scales. Forget which star follows which, start again. The chant doesn't scold, it resets. The ocean is patient, but you have to be too. The Southern Cross tilts on its axis above the water, and you recall its trick: extend the long axis, and it points directly toward the South Pole, invisible below the horizon. No Polaris here, no handy star, stuck like a tack on the sky. Instead, you improvise. You line up the cross measure with your eye and approximate, and somehow it's enough. You chuckle softly. Imagine trying that while driving. Well, officer, I didn't have a GPS, but I extended the constellation Orion's belt and kind of guessed where Walmart was. Somehow, though, these sailors made it work across oceans, and you struggle not to laugh at the comparison. The horizon breathes dark water, rising and falling in rhythm with your thoughts. You begin to see why these star houses mattered. They weren't abstract coordinates. They were landmarks in a world without landmarks. Every star was a street sign, and every sign told you, keep going, you're on track. Dawn will find you near land. The chant hums again, low and slow, wrapping the stars into memory. Your eyelids grow heavier. You imagine each star house lighting up in sequence, guiding your canoe like runway lamps, steady and sure. And with each glow, the sea feels less threatening, more like a road you've traveled before. The canoe glides gently, the stars slowly drifting overhead, and you find yourself looking straight up rather than at the horizon. Here, right above your head, another secret waits. Certain stars pass directly overhead, zenith stars, and for Polynesian navigators, those were more than twinkling decorations. They were latitude markers, invisible lines etched across the ocean. If you know which star crowns your head at night, you know which island you're in line with. Suddenly, the flat sea gains invisible stripes like a giant notebook stretched from equator to pole. Here's a mainstream fact: Hawaii is aligned with Arcturus, while Tahiti matches directly with Sirius. When one of these stars passes overhead, you know you're on the same latitude as that island. No sextant, no fancy calculations, just a quick glance up, and the sky confirms your path. The quirky tidbit that slips in makes you grin. Some navigators nicknamed these zenith stars like neighbors living directly upstairs. Imagine living in an apartment building and knowing that whenever Mr. Arcturus stomps across the ceiling, you're exactly on the right floor. The cosmos becomes your noisy upstairs neighbor, but instead of being annoyed, you thank him for helping you find your way. Historians still argue whether zenith star tracking was enough to pinpoint islands consistently. After all, stars move seasonally, and cloud cover is an unforgiving prankster. Some argue that zenith stars gave only a broad line, a corridor, rather than an exact GPS-style fix. Others believe navigators combined zenith cues with bird routes, swells and cloud formations to zero in on targets. The debate continues like the ocean itself, steady, endless, rolling back and forth. You tip your head and notice how satisfying it feels to think of the sky as a measuring tape. No need to stretch ropes or mark charts. The sky unfurls above you, and when a certain star perches at the very top of its arc, you know you're in sync with an invisible stripe across the planet. Of course, the sarcastic side of your brain pipes up. Sure, that works if the clouds cooperate. But what if you're stuck under rain squalls for days? Do you just tell the crew, "Hold on guys, our upstairs neighbor is being shy tonight"? You imagine the awkward silence, the rolling eyes, and maybe someone in the back muttering, "This wouldn't happen if we had Wi-Fi." Yet the truth remains, zenith stars provided a kind of cosmic checkpoint. Imagine steering blind across thousands of miles, and then one night seeing a star directly overhead that whispers, "Yes, you're still on track." Relief must have washed over crews like a second tide. You lean back against the crossbeam, the canoe swaying gently. The Milky Way spills overhead, and your body feels as if it too is part of those latitude lines. The sea stops being boundless chaos. It becomes ruled paper, and the stars scribble directions across it, slow and steady. The hush of waves soothes you further. You imagine drifting under Canopus, then under Vega, each one clicking you into place along an invisible grid. It's almost funny the modern world pays big money for GPS satellites, yet here's a system that costs nothing but time memory and clear skies. As the night deepens, your eyelids heavy, the zenith stars above pulse softly like distant beacons. They aren't shouting, they're whispering. Stay steady, keep faith, you're not lost. And you believe them, letting their reassurance pull you deeper into calm. The stars blur behind a patch of passing cloud, and suddenly your celestial compass vanishes. The horizon is blank, the dome of heaven smudged out. This is the moment when you'd probably panic, your entire star map stolen by weather. But Polynesian navigators didn't freeze when the sky closed its curtains. Instead, they bent down and listened to the sea. The ocean itself is a second map. Swells roll in long, steady lines carved by distant winds. You kneel, hand resting on the side of the canoe, and you begin to feel it, the main swell thumping gently from the northeast, a quieter cross swell nudging from the south. Even with eyes shut, you could keep a course by aligning the canoe with those rhythms as if the sea were a drum and you were drumming in time. Here's a mainstream fact: swells can persist for thousands of miles long after the storm that generated them has vanished. Navigators learn to distinguish at least 5 or 6 overlapping wave patterns, a layered language of the ocean floor itself. Now for the quirky detail birds were the gossip columnists of the sea. Frigate birds, for example, can't sleep on the water, they must return to land. So if you saw them circling in late afternoon, it was like a neon sign flashing island this way. Terns, noddies, even the casual tropic bird became unwitting messengers, their flight paths woven into the navigator's silent calculations. You smile at the idea of an entire aviary functioning as unpaid tour guides, like Uber drivers who won't stop circling your block until you notice. Historians still argue whether these cues alone were reliable for long voyages. Did navigators really sense land by cloud glows reflecting from lagoons over the horizon? Or is that partly legend exaggerated by later storytellers? Some experiments suggest it's possible, while skeptics remain unconvinced. The argument itself ripples like the swells back and forth without ever fully resolving. The canoe creaks as you lean to watch the foam trail behind. Phosphorescent plankton spark faintly silver dust stirred by the hulls. For a navigator, even this shimmer told a story. Steady glow means steady course, while sudden breaks hint at eddies or currents. You grin drowsily, imagine learning your road trip direction, not from highway signs, but from how the bugs bounce off your windshield. Strange, yet it works. The more you watch, the more every detail matters. The smell of the air hints at whether you're nearing land. The color of clouds at dusk betrays shallow reefs reflecting upward. Even the taste of rainwater, fresh versus briny whispers, clues about your latitude. It's absurdly poetic and absurdly exhausting. You'd need the memory of a librarian, the patience of a monk, and the stomach of a stunt driver to keep track of it all. The swell slaps steady against the hull, and you realize you're rocking to the same rhythm as the ocean's heartbeat. Without stars, the waves themselves have become your compass. The birds overhead are your weather app, the clouds your radar, the plankton your glowing breadcrumbs. You let the details wash over you, marveling at how many ways there are to not get lost when all you have is sea. And quietly, almost reluctantly, you admit to yourself, even without the stars, the ocean might still guide you home. The night grows long and the canoe feels like it's floating, not just across the ocean, but across time itself. You glance toward the navigator, seated cross-legged near the mast lips, moving silently. At first you think he's praying, but then you catch the rhythm. It's a chant, soft, steady, like someone reciting multiplication tables in a whisper. Only these aren't numbers, they're star names, horizon points and paths, stitched together by memory. You lean closer, lulled by the cadence. Every phrase is a thread, and the navigator is weaving them into a net to hold the canoe steady on course. The chant isn't meant for the crew, it's meant to keep the memory alive. The stars may be hidden by clouds, but as long as the words keep flowing, the map stays lit in his mind. Here's a mainstream fact. Polynesian navigators trained with elaborate chants that could take hours to recite encoding sequences of stars, swells, and directions. They were not casual poems, they were entire navigational textbooks stored in the human voice. The quirky tidbit. Some schools of navigation taught apprentices using knotted cords or shells strung together tactile aids that helped recall sequences when chants grew overwhelming. You imagine running your fingers over knots in the dark, each bump prompting the next star, the next bearing. It's like the prehistoric version of scrolling through a Spotify playlist, but instead of catchy hooks, you're replaying Orion rising over the eastern horizon. Historians still argue whether these mnemonic devices were widespread or localized. Were knots and shells a universal teaching tool or just a clever trick from certain islands? Some say the oral tradition was strong enough without props. Others insist that backup tools existed precisely because the human brain, no matter how trained, occasionally slips. The debate, like most, remains unresolved, yet the image of a navigator fingering a knotted cord at midnight is hard to resist. The canoe rocks gently as the chant continues, and you notice another rhythm layered on top the watch system. Crews divided their nights into shifts, each navigator or apprentice staying alert for a few hours while others slept. Voices traded in low tones, sometimes overlapping chants like a relay race of memory. One watch hands the map to the next, not by parchment but by whisper. You sigh, realizing how grueling that must have been. Long nights, short sleep, endless vigilance. You struggle to remember if you fed the cat yesterday, and these people remembered hundreds of celestial cues on half rest. Respect feels too small a word. A wave slaps harder, jostling you, and you chuckle softly. Imagine trying to stay awake on the graveyard shift while the sea rocks you like a giant waterbed. Forget coffee breaks, these navigators kept themselves sharp, with chants, chewing bits of root and sheer stubbornness. You can almost hear someone mutter, "One more star path, then I promise I'll nap." The chant dwindles into silence, but the silence isn't empty. It's filled with the echo of memory, with knots under fingers, and with the unbroken line of stars overhead. You lean back against the hull, eyes fluttering shut, and let yourself drift with the rhythm of a world that stays awake for you. The canoe doesn't need a glowing screen or a printed atlas. It only needs voices, knots, and watches stitched together like a lay across the night. Morning light brushes the horizon and your canoe drifts into a new comparison. You're still thinking about chants and knots when someone produces something unusual, a frame of thin sticks lashed together, bent at odd angles, dotted with shells. It looks nothing like a map, more like a craft project gone wrong. But this, you realize, is a Marshallese stick chart, a cousin to the Polynesian mental maps. The idea is simple in theory and maddening in practice. Curved sticks mark swell patterns, straight ones show main routes, and shells represent islands. Hold the chart at arm's length, tilt your head, and you suddenly see wave refraction, how swells bend around invisible land. It's like trying to read an ocean's fingerprint. The chart doesn't guide you during a voyage, you memorize it on land, then leave it behind. Like Polynesian chants, the chart is a teacher, not a passenger. Here's a mainstream fact: stick charts were used in the Marshall Islands into the 20th century, with three main styles: the Rebelib showing large areas, the Matang a training chart, and the Meadow for specific voyages. Each chart was unique, almost personal, since every navigator interpreted swells a little differently. But the quirky tidbit. Some elders reportedly insisted you couldn't really read a stick chart at all unless you'd already sailed the route. To outsiders, it looked like random spaghetti on wood. To initiates, it was a memory trigger. That meant handing one to a European sailor was almost a prank. The poor guy would squint, nod politely, and still be hopelessly lost. Historians still argue whether Polynesians themselves ever used physical stick charts or if that tradition was limited to Micronesian cultures like the Marshallese. Some scholars suggest Polynesians preferred to carry the chart in their heads, while others suspect hybrid methods may have existed. The truth remains murky like a stick chart seen in dim light. You tilt the frame trying to make sense of it. The sun glitters on the lashing, the shells gleam faintly. You imagine learning from one of these, crouching in sand, tracing fingers over the sticks, then memorizing every bend before heading to sea. It's oddly like cramming for an exam, except your test happens to involve survival across thousands of miles of water. And of course, your sleepy sarcasm chimes in. Sure, I'll just memorize this bundle of popsicle sticks and bet my life on it. No big deal. Yet people did. Successfully, repeatedly. It worked. Which makes you laugh quietly, because somehow the weirdest, most unintuitive diagrams turned out to be seaworthy. As the canoe sways, you tuck the thought away. Whether sung in chants or tied in sticks, the principle is the same. Maps don't have to be drawn in ink. They only need to live where you can recall them, steady as the horizon. The canoe slides along under a calm night, stars scattered like powdered sugar on black velvet. You've memorized star houses, chanted paths, even peeked at stick charts. But now the navigator introduces something stranger, something that makes your head tilt. It's called the ETAC system, a method of imagining progress, not by the canoe moving, but by pretending an island drifts beneath the stars. You squint at the horizon trying to picture it. The canoe stays still in your mind. Above the stars crawl overhead. And somewhere out there, a mental island, an invisible reference point slides beneath those stars as if it were the one making the journey. You mark your progress not by miles sailed, but by when that imaginary island passes under certain stars. Its geometry meets daydreaming, and your brain almost cramps trying to keep up. Here's a mainstream fact. The ETAC method was documented among Carolinian navigators in Micronesia, and scholars argue that similar thinking might have shaped Polynesian techniques. It essentially creates a moving grid in the mind, giving structure to otherwise endless ocean. The quirky tidbit. Some navigators described the mental island as if it were alive. Sometimes a turtle, sometimes a canoe of spirits gliding under the star canopy. Imagine telling your crew, "Don't worry, the ghost turtle island just passed under Altair, so we're halfway there." You can't help but chuckle at how surreal yet practical that sounds. Historians still argue whether Polynesians themselves fully practiced ETAC, or if it remained more of a Micronesian specialty. Some believe Polynesians leaned more on zenith stars and swells, while others suggest the mental island method quietly underpinned long voyages across the Pacific. The evidence, like the imagined island itself, drifts tantalizingly in and out of reach. You close your eyes and try it. You anchor your mind, the canoe doesn't move. Instead, picture a tiny island gliding along. You imagine it passing beneath Canopus, then Sirius, then Vega. Each star crossing marks a checkpoint like stamps on a passport. It's bizarrely comforting. You don't feel lost because the moving island is doing the heavy lifting in your imagination. Of course, your sarcastic brain interrupts, right, because pretending a phantom island is cruising past overhead makes so much sense. Yet, as you settle into the rhythm, it does start to make sense. The illusion is soothing, even hypnotic, and you realize how clever it is. By flipping the perspective, the navigator gains a measuring stick for progress that doesn't rely on counting miles or hours. The canoe rocks gently, and you grin, half asleep, half enchanted by the mental gymnastics. A phantom island slides under the sky, the stars mark its crossing, and your canoe remains calm in the center. You might not truly grasp it, but you feel its strange reassurance. The journey is no longer endless. It's divided into segments, each one manageable, each one a step toward land. The air is still the sea, like hammered bronze, and you realize something uncanny. Even when clouds smother the stars, navigators keep sailing. No twinkle above, no horizon line, just grey ceiling and dark water. Yet somehow they don't panic. They trust another guide, entirely the swells. Close your eyes and you start to notice it. The canoe rises, falls, tilts a hair left, then steadies again. Beneath the surface, long rolling waves carry patterns invisible to casual eyes. Some swell sets travel thousands of miles steady as conveyor belts. Polynesian navigators tuned their bodies to feel them lying on their backs in the hull to sense minute shifts. It's like learning to read Braille, except the dots are ocean pulses running under your spine. Here's your mainstream fact. Pacific navigators categorized swells into families: primary swells from distant trade winds, secondary ones bent around islands, even reflected waves rebounding like echoes. By combining their direction, a navigator could sense if land was near or if the canoe was drifting off course. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some accounts describe navigators tying their hair to the mast so that even in sleep, the tug of the swells would tug their heads awake if the canoe's rhythm shifted. Imagine snoozing with a literal wave alarm clock attached to your scalp. You wince at the thought of tangles, but admit it's ingenious. Historians still argue whether this bodily wave compass was formalized knowledge with specific names and categories in Polynesia, or whether it was mostly tacit skill passed through practice. Some written records suggest elaborate taxonomies, while others dismiss them as later embellishments. The truth ripples somewhere in between, like a swell you can feel, but not always define. You lie back and test it. The canoe rocks gently, and after a while you think you can distinguish layers: a broad undercurrent tugging north, a sharper chop at an angle. Your body becomes a seismograph tracing invisible signatures. It's strangely intimate, like the ocean is whispering directions through your bones. And of course you mutter to yourself, "Cool, so my butt is basically a GPS now." Still, the more you focus, the more natural it feels. Each swell points like a compass needle you don't need to carry. The sea breathes under you, rocking with ancient patience. You realize why navigators could sail blindfolded, why clouds or fog didn't terrify them. The swells themselves were stars you could lie down and feel steady as heartbeat, constant as breath. The canoe presses onward, and you notice that the stars and swells aren't the only teachers. The sky itself becomes a library. Clouds, birds, even faint colors at dawn all whisper information if you're patient enough to listen. You lift your gaze and suddenly the atmosphere feels like another map layered above the ocean. Take clouds, for example. You spot a lone tuft on the horizon. To you it looks like random fluff, but a navigator sees a hint. Tall cumulus often form above islands fed by warm air rising from land. Even atoll lagoons reflect light upward, creating a subtle brightness at night called island loom. You squint, wondering how anyone notices such faint glows. Then again, if your life depends on finding land, you probably start obsessing over every flicker. Here's your mainstream fact. Polynesian navigators relied on land-indicating clouds, especially the piled anvil-shaped cumulus clouds, which rarely form above open sea, but consistently hover above islands. The consistency turned them into reliable beacons long before radar existed. And the quirky tidbit. Some oral traditions claimed you could smell land before you saw it. Fragrant hints of vegetation or even bird droppings carried miles by wind. You chuckle at the idea of sniffing the breeze and declaring, "Yup, smells like coconuts." Must be close. Oddly enough, science backs it. Tiny airborne particles do travel far, meaning those noses weren't just superstitious. Historians still argue whether Polynesian crews systematically logged such sensory cues, or if individual navigators just kept mental scrapbooks of smells, glows, and bird calls. Some scholars point to chants that seem like field notes. Others say these details were too fleeting to codify. The debate drifts unresolved, much like faint cloud shadows across the sea. As dawn breaks, you notice frigate birds circling. Unlike gulls, these birds don't sleep on the water. They need land to roost. Their daily foraging patterns basically draw flight paths to islands. Follow one long enough and you'd be pointed straight toward home. You watch them wheel in lazy arcs, wings stretched like ink strokes, and suddenly they look less like birds and more like feathered signposts. Your sleepy sarcasm pipes up. So basically, the navigational system is ask the birds, smell the air, and don't ignore suspiciously lumpy clouds. Got it. And yet the more you watch, the more impressive it feels. Every detail you once dismissed as random becomes part of a coded language. The canoe glides steady under this sky of hidden signals, and you realize the ocean wasn't empty to these navigators. It was crowded with signs as busy and legible as a city street if you only knew how to read it. Your canoe glides onward the sea, steady the sky, sprawling. You've been marveling at stars, swells, clouds, and birds, but now the focus shifts back to the human mind, specifically how it remembers all this without drowning in details. Polynesian navigation wasn't just about learning, it was about never forgetting. You try to imagine it. Hundreds of stars, their seasonal risings and settings, dozens of swell patterns, the calls of birds, the look of distant clouds, the sheen of light on the water. It's more than any notebook could hold, except there was no notebook. The notebook was the brain. And not just your brain, but a whole lineage of brains stretching across generations. Here's a mainstream fact: in many Polynesian societies, master navigators, wayfinders, were part of an oral guild, their training taking years of recitation voyages and constant correction. Knowledge wasn't shared lightly, it was often considered sacred, passed only to chosen apprentices. The quirky tidbit. Some sources suggest navigators would deliberately overload their apprentices with chants until their minds felt scrambled, forcing them to rebuild order on their own. Think of it like an ancient stress test or a professor assigning a 300-page reading list overnight just to see who doesn't cry. You can almost hear an elder smirking, "If you survive the confusion, you'll survive the sea." Historians still argue whether Polynesian mnemonic systems were as rigidly formulaic as later written accounts make them sound, or if flexibility and improvisation were always part of the deal. Some claim there were strict curricula. Others think memory tricks were more personal, shaped by each navigator's quirks. The scholarly back and forth mirrors the same tension between fixed chants and flexible interpretations you've been seeing all along. You picture an apprentice kneeling by firelight reciting star paths until their tongue trips while the elder listens with half-closed eyes. The younger one stumbles, grows frustrated, maybe mutters, "This is impossible." The elder chuckles not unkindly because the point is endurance as much as accuracy. Out at sea, forgetting one star's rise time could mean drifting hundreds of miles off course. Better to sweat in practice than sink in voyage. And then there's you, smirking in your sleepy way. Sure, I can't even remember my online passwords, but let's casually memorize 300 stars. No problem. Yet you start to see why it worked. Repetition, ritual rhythm, combined with the raw necessity of survival, turned memory into muscle. The canoe rocks gently and you realize your own mind has been building a little chant through these nights. Stars, swells, birds, clouds, again and again. The trick isn't genius, the trick is never letting go. The canoe drifts into another dawn, and with it comes a reminder: no navigator ever sailed alone. You may have pictured a lone genius steering by starlight, but in truth, Polynesian voyaging was a social orchestra. Every member of the crew had a role, even if only one carried the sacred title of wayfinder. You glance around. One person manages sails, trimming them to match the swell. Another tends food, doling out coconut water and dried breadfruit. Someone else watches the horizon, calling out birds or cloud formations. It's not just helpful, it's survival. On an open canoe, no one gets to slack off. Here's a mainstream fact: large Polynesian voyages could involve double-hulled canoes carrying dozens of people, including not just sailors but also families, crops, animals and tools for colonization. These weren't weekend fishing trips, they were mobile societies setting out to build new homes. The quirky tidbit. Some traditions mention stargazing benches built into the canoe flat spots where the navigator could lie comfortably to align their sight with the horizon. Imagine requesting ergonomic furniture on a wooden vessel centuries ago. "Excuse me, Captain, could you install my celestial recliner here?" You grin at the image of a navigator lounging while everyone else hauls ropes. Historians still argue whether crews were fully trained in navigational basics or whether most relied entirely on the master wayfinder. Some scholars believe everyone had at least partial knowledge in case of accident. Others think the system was rigidly hierarchical, knowledge locked away with a select few. The debate, much like crew duties themselves, remains divided. You watch them work now, silent and synchronized. The navigator murmurs a direction, the sail handler responds, the lookout nods. The canoe itself becomes a kind of family humming with tasks. Even children, according to some accounts, played roles, fetching water-learning chants, absorbing skills by osmosis. And then there's you, amused at your own hypothetical role. I'd probably be the snack manager, making sure no one eats all the taro chips on day one. But even that small duty matters. On a voyage lasting weeks, rationing can mean life or death. The canoe creaks, the wind whispers, and you realize the brilliance wasn't just in star maps or swells. It was in cooperation, the web of people keeping one another awake, safe, and oriented. Navigation wasn't the burden of one genius, it was the heartbeat of a community stretched across planks and ropes. The horizon burns orange, the canoe sliding forward as though drawn by invisible strings. At this point, you've almost started believing you could navigate too: stars, swells, birds, clouds, chants. But then you're reminded of something less tidy: mistakes happened. And when they did, the difference between recovery and disaster often came down to stubborn patience. You imagine a crew realizing they've drifted. Maybe a current was stronger than expected. Maybe clouds hid the stars too long. The navigator feels a sick lurch in the stomach. Are we still on course? Out here, one wrong heading could mean an empty ocean with no rescue. Here's a mainstream fact: Polynesian navigators had dead reckoning systems estimating speed and direction over time, cross-checking with swells, birds, or sunrise positions. It wasn't flawless, but it gave them ways to re-anchor their sense of location. And the quirky tidbit. Some oral accounts describe navigators deliberately getting lost as part of training. They'd sail aimlessly for a while, then challenge themselves to recover by reading swells and skies until they found home again. Imagine that as a lesson. Congratulations, you've graduated. Now here's your blindfold. Good luck not dying. You can't help but laugh at the cruel brilliance of it. Historians still argue whether Polynesians occasionally relied on sheer luck in landfall, or if every successful voyage reflected flawless precision. Some point to accidental drift voyages confirmed by modern computer models. Others insist those same models underestimate ancient skill. The argument rocks back and forth like Weller canoeing cross-currents. You try it yourself, pretending you're lost. You shut your eyes, count imaginary days at sea, then open them. The swell feels steady from the east. A faint smear of clouds suggests land. Birds wheel in the distance. Slowly, you stitch the pieces back together. Not certainty, but enough to keep going. Enough to believe land is somewhere ahead. Your sarcastic side mutters, great. So the ancient solution to panic was, don't panic, genius. But you feel the deeper truth too. Confidence tempered by training was as important as the stars. A wavering navigator doomed the crew. A steady one, even when unsure, gave hope until a sign appeared. The canoe steadies under your feet, and you sense the weight of those ancient mistakes and recoveries. It wasn't magic, just resilience. A quiet, stubborn refusal to give in to the vastness of the sea. The canoe hums forward, timbers creaking in rhythm with the swell. You've gathered so many fragments, chants, star maps, stick charts, wave sense, birds, clouds, memory, community, even mistakes. And yet one truth surfaces most clearly. This knowledge was never meant for everyone. It was guarded, wrapped in ritual, often spoken in whispers at night. You picture an apprentice chosen carefully, perhaps from a navigator's own family line. They'd rise before dawn, learn to chant stars until their throat ached, and endure long, silent watches on the canoe. Some cultures treated this role as almost priestly, blending astronomy, religion, and survival into one sacred office. Being a wayfinder wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Here's your mainstream fact: in places like Hawaii, the PWO ceremony marked the initiation of a navigator, a solemn rite involving seclusion, ritual fasting, and symbolic rebirth into sacred knowledge. Once completed, the apprentice held responsibilities as heavy as a chief's. Now for the quirky tidbit: in some traditions, navigators were believed to inherit a sort of ocean vision, dreams in which stars whispered or ancestral spirits pointed the way. You chuckle at the idea of sleeping through class and waking up with a divine cheat sheet, though you admit After nights of rocking waves, it doesn't sound far-fetched. Historians still argue whether these spiritual layers were later embellishments or always integral to navigation. Was the sea a practical challenge first, or was it always both cosmos and temple? The debate swirls unresolved like reflection shimmering on a lagoon at dusk. You sit quietly in the canoe, letting the thought wash over you. Navigation wasn't just science, it was identity. A navigator held the fate of lives, but also the continuity of culture, the invisible thread tying distant islands together. And now gently, the rhythm of the story slows. The ocean softens under your canoe, the stars fade, the swell evens. You imagine lowering sails, the vessel gliding into a calm lagoon. Coconut palms line the shore, birds call drowsily, and the horizon finally rests. Your eyelids grow heavy. The chants you've carried drift into a whisper. The stick charts the phantom islands, the swell patterns, all of it dissolves into quiet waves against sand. You don't need to remember it all tonight. The ocean remembers for you. So let yourself ease down. The story loosens, the imagery stretches every sentence longer, softer. The navigator's chants hush into lullabies. The sea becomes a blanket, the stars tiny nightlights overhead. You breathe slow. The canoe stops rocking. The shore is close, safe, familiar. The ocean has carried you just as it carried countless others without losing you to its vastness. Now rest, drift, dream. The maps are folded, the chants gone quiet, and the stars close their eyes with you. Sleep comes like the tide, inevitable, gentle, endless.